I am Jenna Merlucci, the president of ACHE of South Florida, and I thank you all for being here tonight. And I want to give a special thank you to Nicholas Children's Hospital for hosting this event. A lot of great feedback from everyone that we are here in Miami and on this beautiful campus. So thank you again to Nicholas Children's Hospital. And a lot of people don't know, but there's a lot of people in the background that make these events happen. Not only the volunteers on our board, but also the people at Nicholas Children's Hospital who are helping. So our food and nutrition staff and ICIT here, and you really rolled out the red carpet. So thank you for all of those who are working extra for us tonight. Also, a big thank you to all of our 2023 sponsors. ACHE of South Florida could not do what it's due for all of our members without our sponsors. So thank you to our platinum sponsors, Leantas, Memorial Healthcare System, and Nova Southeastern University. Our gold sponsors, Baptist Health South Florida, Baxter, Broward Health, D-Signage, FAU, Jackson Health System, Nicholas Children's Hospital, Plant Moran, and University of Miami. Our silver sponsors, Barry University, Cleveland Clinic, Florida International University, and Vitas. Our bronze sponsors, BDO, HIMPROS, HOPCO, Park Shore Pharmacon, and SFHHA. And we have several media partners and supporters as well. So thank you to all of our sponsors. A little bit about ACHE for those of you who are new or maybe not members looking to join. But here is our vision, mission, and values. And so our mission is to advance our members in healthcare leadership excellence. So this is ACHE numbers at a national level. You know, ACHE is a national organization, so it's a network of over 40,000 members, 76 chapters throughout the country, numerous education hours, 8.8 million communications to members. It's a very large network, and so, you know, healthcare, we always say, is large but becomes small, so being part of this organization makes it healthcare a little smaller. So our South Florida chapter, we have over 1,200 members. We have 139 fellows. I'm very proud of that. 239 student members. You can see we have big partnerships with our schools around here. And follow us on LinkedIn. You can get our QR code. We're looking to get more followers, but 3,000 and counting. Very quickly, you can see that we are a local chapter of ACHE National. We changed our name a few years back, so we used to be the South Florida Healthcare Executive Forum. We decided to change our name to ACHE of South Florida, so there was no confusion that people knew that we were affiliated with ACHE. And so a big thank you to our board of directors. Like I said, these events, nothing happens without this board. It's a board of volunteers, leaders around the healthcare industry. And I always say this, but it's very nice. We're from all different organizations, and we kind of take that off when we're talking about ACHE, and we work really nicely together. So thank you to our board members, and there are a few here tonight, so thank you. And lastly, please connect with us. You can visit our website at acheofsouthflorida.org, our national website. Follow us on LinkedIn, and we're always looking for volunteers if you'd like to come and help us out. So thank you again, and now I invite Carlos, who set this program up, to come up. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. This is a great turnout, by the way. And I want to echo Jenna's comments. This doesn't happen with the events planning team, IT, and food and nutrition. They've done a great job today of putting this together. So thank you guys for doing that. Next, I have the honor to introduce our president and CEO, Matt Love. And I could, before he comes up here, I want to say a couple of things about him. And it's been a great tenure. Matt has been with us about 4 or 5 years. He was hired to be our CFO, and he brought a lot of positive changes. A few things that have happened since he joined. We are the #1 top-ranked children's hospital in South Florida. We're also #1, we're tied in the state with 2 others, but we're #1 children's hospital in the state as well. So that's great. One of our pillars is about people. And we were recently named top 100 in Newsweek to be employed by Nicholas. So there's a lot to say about that. We have a great family here. I can go on and on and on. Matt is also a fellow and an engineer, for those that may not know. So Matt, come up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. It's great to see so many faces here tonight. You know, being the leader of Nicholas Children's, my job is actually really easy. You know, there's nothing like taking care of kids, right? So I've been in the adult side, like many of you, and you know that's rewarding too. But I got to tell you, you know, waking up every single day and leading an organization that only takes care of kids, it's magical. And so you talk about kind of the awards and things that we've gotten done over the last couple of years. It really has been a team, and really refocusing on what we do best, and that's taking care of patients and families. So a little bit about our organization. I'm going to walk around a little bit. Thank you all for coming here tonight. Nicholas Children's, as Carlos said, ranked #1 in the state of Florida in terms of children's health care. We're one of only 4 freestanding specially licensed children's hospitals in the state of Florida. So kind of spread across the different areas around the state, the Northeast, Central, the West Coast, and us down here in South Florida. We see about 500,000 kids every single year. So people think about it down here in terms of the main hospital. We have about 15 or 16,000 admissions and observation patients, but we see about another 500,000 in our ambulatory network, going from Homestead to Miami-Dade to Broward and to Palm Beach counties. So a pretty robust network on the ambulatory side of things. And that's really to keep care of local, right? Keep kids in their community and take care of them there. But when they need something higher end, them coming down here. So think of the bumps and bruises, all that stuff, right, gets taken care of in all of these locations. But the high-end heart surgeries, the high-end neurosurgeries, cancer surgeries, etc., they really come down here in terms of taking care of kids down here. Another fact is we're about, so those of you in the adult world, hopefully understand this, we're about 70% Medicaid. So think about in the adult world where, between Medicare and Medicaid, you're probably 50, 60, 70%. We joke around, I'd love to get paid Medicare rates. For those of you that in the state of Florida understand that, right, in terms of what the state pays on the Medicaid side. But again, that's just a testament, and you see that in a lot of pediatric facilities, right? So across the state, about 50% of the kids in the state of Florida are on Medicaid in some form or fashion. Does it surprise you that there are higher utilizers of services and for healthcare services? Probably noticed we have a lot going on here on this campus. Anybody notice the crane that we walked in? So we're really excited about that. That's really one of the things that we started last year with the new surgical tower. We are a surgical machine, right? So we don't birth babies down here. And so kind of the normal newborns or the feeders or growers, those really stay in the hospitals where the mom delivers. But when you need surgical care, you come here. So our ORs are ultimately important to us. 60 to 70% of our revenue goes through our ORs. And so you liken our current ORs to a house that's 30 years old, because their ORs are about 35 years old. And think about a house that's 30 years old and a new kitchen and the stuff that you've thrown in it, right? I've lived in a couple different houses. The best thing I ever did was buy a brand new house versus remodel. And so, that the OR is about 400 square feet per room. We're going to 800 square feet, the best technology. 17-foot ceilings, going up from 12, and so really excitement around the campus here. Javier and the team are leading this, doing a great job, 127,000 square feet, and they promised me it'll be up by the outside by the end of the year, and then we'll be in it in about a year and a half. So real excitement there. We're also doing a lot in terms of the community around mental health, right? So everyone knows that mental health is a crisis, specifically in the pediatric world, right? Our volumes, and I'm sure like everyone else, have gone through the roof in terms of the ED, the wait times, finding beds, all of that stuff. And we talk about it being a community and a village to solve this. So we're actually going to double our inpatient capacity, opening our inpatient unit sometime in the May or June timeframe. I learn more and more about construction every day, and I find about doors that we can't buy because of supply chain issues, or I can't remember what the windows was the last thing. But really, we're excited about expanding our inpatient psychiatry capacity. We're also doing a lot around technology. So technology, just a couple quick things, in kids, distraction and virtual reality, immersive technology, those types of things is really, really important. So you might think about it as playing, right, toys, and I'm reminded often that they're very expensive toys for kids, but really it's around the benefit to the patients and families. So when we've done some of these technologies, particularly in our echo cardiac rooms, we've demonstrated a reduction in sedation of 60% on kids. And so anytime you can not put a kid under sedation and do a treatment is a win. And so a 60% improvement along those lines is absolutely wonderful. So those are just a few of the things that we're doing. I'm excited to share all of those. I could probably talk for a couple hours, but I know we need to get to the topic at hand, and want to thank the speakers here tonight for your expertise, and the moderator from BDO to help us kind of walk through this. Again, just welcome you to Nicholas Children, and thank you guys for being here.
I like to make an appearance and kind of walk here. My name is Charles Felix. Both Carlos and myself. Carlos is the chair of the Education Committee this year, and I'm his co-chair. So I want you to give Carlos a great hand today because of his work. So let's get started. First thing you need to know is this QR code. Okay? You must have seen on one of the slides, we have some papers in the back that I'll give to you. That's the survey to let us know how well we've done, how poorly. If we do well, thank me. If we do poorly, it's Carlos. Well, let me get to the topic at hand, which is a very, very interesting and timely topic. And I want to introduce you to our moderator tonight, Angelo Perozzi. I have his bio here, but I'm not going to read the bio because I don't need to. I've known Angelo since he was that high. No, I've known Angelo for about 20 years. Angelo is a CPA, comes out of New York, transplanted back down to Florida, has handled large and small medical groups, hospitals, variety of different hospitals, large and small. He knows it. He knows the business backwards and forwards, and that's why we have him as a moderator today. So I'm going to let him introduce the rest of the panel, and thank you for coming tonight.
Hi everyone. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about private equity in healthcare, what it means to everybody here and what's going on. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the banking world. Who knew that Silicon Valley Bank had big funders of healthcare businesses? Very brief background. I'm 40 years, probably a little bit more, as a CPA. I'm a partner with BDO in our Center for Healthcare and Excellence. And yes, it's true, I've been working with hospitals. I just love hospitals, including children's hospitals, and physician groups for that long. So, and just a quick story, I tried to park in the blue garage. Of course, that was closed or filled. I wound up parking in the green garage, so I got my 10,000 steps, maybe more. And so as I walked through the hospital, this corridor, which is 1,000,000 miles long, but had a lot of signs, and I was dropping, seeds so I can get back. I saw a lot of children with smiles on their face, and their parents. I saw some kids crying. I'm a grandpa of a 14-month-old, and that just melts me. So I want to give a big hand. You should all give yourselves a big hand for those of you who are working here at this great institution to do this mission and to work with children. As Matt just said, is almost akin to a religious calling. It's just a very special place, and you're probably blessed to be in such an environment and do such good things. So congrats to you all. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then I'll allow them to, as each of them speak on their piece, tell you a little bit about their background very briefly, and then just jump right in. We have about an hour or so. To my immediate right is Ben Mirza. He is our resident attorney, so whatever we say in here, we're protected. A lot of experience in corporate healthcare mergers and acquisitions and what's going on in this world. He's just terrific. The empty seat is for effect. You're looking at my partner, Brad Boyd, here. He's the head of our advisory business at BDO. He is in Boston under about 3 feet of snow and 50-mile-an-hour winds. I said, good idea that you stay back. The power of technology, he will be with us on the screen. So thank you, Brad. Lori Levine, for those of you who work at this great place, Administrative Director of Corporate Finance here at Nicholas, another great talent, and she has some stories from her perspective and the institution's perspective relative to private equity. And finally, my old friend Jim Petkus, and he will introduce himself, CEO of a healthcare consulting firm here now, but his background, and I don't want to hear any boos or hisses, but his background is he was a prominent CFO of some of the South Florida hospitals at HCA. He also ran some of those, no boos or hisses, and he also ran some of those hospitals in London as well. So he comes to us with a wealth of experience and has a lot to say also about private equity. So before I turn it over to Ben, who will kick us off, he's our lawyer now, I wanted to read a couple of statistics here to set the stage. And it was a survey done for PAI, that's the Physicians Advocacy Institute, and it was prepared by Avalere Health. And the title of this survey was, which was really interesting, COVID-19 impact on physician practice ownership and employment. And they surveyed the country from 2019 to 2021. So really right smack there in the middle of those bad old days. It's a 3-year study, and they pointed out a couple of things. And then I'll describe what's happening here in the Southeast. National trend, almost 109,000 additional physicians became employees of hospitals or other corporate entities. 83,000 of those occurred during the onset of COVID. So that's a 19% increase. Amazing numbers. Hospital acquisitions, 58,000 additional physicians became hospital employees during that 3-year period. 51,000 of those, or 88%, since the onset of COVID. So God knows it affected us in many different ways, good, bad, and indifferent, but the shift with how physicians practice and their movement towards institutions like this is obvious. 58,000, which is just an amazing number. And also hospitals acquired 4,800 additional physician practices over that 3-year period. So there was a lot of movement in the mergers and acquisitions environment, somewhat financed by private equity. On the corporate side, that was the hospital side. Corporate acquisitions, 50,000 additional physicians became employees of corporate entities, and 32,000 of those, or 65%, at the onset of COVID. So 108,000, almost 50-50, 108,000 physicians moved to either employee model with hospitals, and the others, another about 50% of them, 50,000 moved to corporate-owned entities. So the shift that started a little bit before COVID, accelerated during COVID, obviously, was very, very meaningful. One last quick statistic. So some people may be thinking, well, it's not here, it's only in the Northeast, it's in the Midwest, it's wherever. In the Southeast, during that period, 19 through 21, so 3 years, almost 12% of physicians, moved and became employees of hospitals here in the Southeast. 12% of that, 50 or 60,000. And about 8% of practices, whole practices, moved here in the Southeast. So and those numbers are similar across the country. So it's not one pocket or one geographic area that was excluded. So before I turn it over to the panel, and I will pepper them with some easy questions, maybe some hard questions. We'd love to have a show of hands as to, have a lot of Nicholas people here, but basically folks who work for tax-exempt or not-for-profit hospitals. Raise your hand. So most of you. So we'll focus accordingly, because some of you are seeing private equity, and most of you maybe not, but we'll explain what's going out in the real world here and how they're looking at physician groups. And so any corporate entities here or big physician practice management company folk that work for them, or we mostly, and look, you're my family, hospital people. Mostly hospital people. Okay. So let me introduce you to Ben. Ben, brag about yourself for a minute. And let's hear from a legal perspective what you've been involved with relative to private equity in the past few years.
So you guys heard him say I can brag about myself, right? And I'm the first one with a mic. So good luck to everybody else. But actually, my background is really in legal. Prior to that, I used to be in finance and accounting. So I've got a pretty strong background in finance. I've got a pretty decent background in legal. I've done about 1,700 cases over the years, which is a fairly large amount. And then I've been in healthcare on and off for almost 20 years. And for the last 8 years, all I've done is healthcare. So with that said, do we go into the introductions and have the next person introduce, or should I keep? No. Yeah. So today I kind of wanted to talk about from my angle, my perspective as to where I think we are in this place. Yeah. So. Hello. Hi. So my practice is actually a small practice. I'm not one of the big law firms, but I do have, it's 3 of us attorneys and a couple of paralegals. And we move a lot of businesses. And so what you'll hear from me is probably a very different angle on how things work, because I come from a very blunt perspective. So the race is on, guys. The race is on in this sector. So what's happening is whether you look at hospitals or whether you look at physician practice groups, the race is on. The headwinds are against us. We've got inflation at an all-time high. We've got interest rates at an all-time high. We're just coming out of COVID. People are trying to survive on governmental payments. But the race is on, and it's a turf war. So when you speak with actually some of these strategists in the healthcare space, what some of them will tell you, when they're being blunt, is in Florida, they're expecting it to go down from however many systems we have now to a bulk of them falling under 7 healthcare systems. So as you see Baptist expanding, as you see Cleveland Clinic expanding, all of these expansions are going on. But how does it go on in a not-for-profit world, right? Yeah, that's an interesting question. So how do you buy a not-for-profit, right? Because you really can't buy a not-for-profit. The way you do it is actually you do an exchange and a swap of seats on the board. So one larger health system will say, you can have one of our seats, and as long as we can get 3 of your seats. So what they do is they swap it out. But what are the advantages? The advantages are access to capital. So what will happen is usually the larger health system will bring in money and give the smaller hospital access to cash, which is something that they've been wanting. They want to redo their hospital. They want to redo different departments. So that's kind of, that's where the hospitals are. At the same time, I'll go into a little bit of physician practice groups. And the physician practice groups, you would think that they've slowed down in terms of acquisitions or divestitures. But from what I'm seeing, they haven't. They haven't slowed down because the race is on. What everyone has realized, or if they haven't already, they're soon going to be following that strategy, is you've got to develop a catchment area. Does everyone know what a catchment area is? So for those who don't understand what a catchment area is, pretend that you live in Coral Gables, and Coral Gables has 200,000 people. And of those 200,000 people, how many will go to a particular hospital? That's their catchment area, right? But how do you get them into a hospital? You do that by putting community centers in different places. And the way you do that is by buying primary care clinics, okay? So once you get the catchment area, you get the patient base, and that's how you bring them back to the hospital. That's how you take them over to your specialist groups. And that's the whole business model that people are chasing. Now, what we've seen in the past years, just now with SVB, for those of you who don't know, SVB did have a fair amount of healthcare firms that did invest in them. And I'll rattle off some of their names: Carrot, Nomad, Olive, Komodo, Dispatch Health, Patient, like PAY, Patient, Digital Ascent, and so forth. So there's a bunch of others. Now, in our local market, you guys might have seen Bright Health come through, right? I wasn't involved at all in the Bright Health transaction. It was a fairly large transaction. They did an IPO about a year ago. You know what they came out at on Wall Street? About $19 a share. You know what I bought it at? $1 a share. You know where it's at today? 38 cents a share. Good thing I got out pretty quickly. But yeah, so the headwinds are on. There are miscalculations that have happened. Where from an outsider's perspective, I think Bright Health messed up on the way they didn't integrate all of these new practices. They were bad at integrating, and they really should have done just a much better job at it. So they really didn't have like an implementation plan that rolled out properly. And from some of the panel in this group, you'll find out that implementation is the key to making an acquisition a success.
Thank you, Ben. Let me introduce really briefly Brad, my partner. That's the empty seat. Thank you, Ben. We'll have some questions for you later. Brad Boyd is here. He's going to speak to us from Boston. He is our leader in the healthcare advisory business, and he will address what we're seeing as advisors and some of the work that us and many others are doing to assist in areas such as due diligence and things like that. So Brad, without further ado, let's
Thank you very much, Angelo, for the introduction. It's terrible being remote again. It puts me back about 2 years ago when COVID hit and having to get on Zoom and learn how to use it. And that I appreciate your patience in letting me be remotely, but I'd much rather be there, I can assure you. A couple of things I want to talk about, and I'll touch a little bit on one or two key points that Ben just mentioned as well, and Angelo in his introduction. I was planning on talking about two of the major focus areas that we see, not only private equity, but non-traditional investors, payers, for example, that are investing in healthcare and medical groups in particular. Angelo talked about physicians continuing to move away from private practice. The cost of running those businesses is very expensive. There's a lot of risk. And look at COVID, organizations that had no backing, no balance sheet behind them. It was they felt the pain more than larger organizations. But also a work-life balance. So employment takes a lot of those pains away. But those physicians aren't always looking to be employed by a hospital. And frankly, hospitals or health systems aren't always looking to subsidize some of these practices. So over the last few years, the national physician practice management companies have attracted a massive amount of investment as physicians have looked to take some risk off the table, but not necessarily be employed by a hospital. They want to have some support behind them, but they still want autonomy over how they can run their practices. So that's one of the areas that these physician practice management companies funded through private equity have really exploded. And many of these are single specialty organizations: dermatology, orthopedics, urology. Behavioral health is becoming a very, very big organization that organizations or private equities is investing in. The retail health of the world, urgent care. I think everyone is familiar with urgent care businesses popping up all over the place, but also hospital groups, hospitalist groups. So in Florida, what we've seen is a really interesting area where there's non-traditional investors. Florida Blue, for example, where there have been investments in organizations that are chasing the value-based care model. My managed care never went away from California, but Florida really does seem to be the epicenter for value-based care investments, as organizations, private equity or other investors are trying to help organizations grow through a balance of quality and outcomes and risk, and using a lot of their financial skills in order to manage clinical practices. And the fascinating piece there is a lot of these investors, these bankers, they're not healthcare. They've never managed practices. They've never treated a patient, but they're bringing a financial discipline to practice management in hopes of really shifting the value equation, which has really been interesting. Sanitas is a really fascinating example that Angelo and I have gotten to know and work with, funded by Florida Blue, a payer. And payers in different parts of the country are absolutely funding groups. Sanitas comes out of South America and Karalty, where they manage lives under a very, very small investment, and they've demonstrated quality at a lower cost. And they're actually starting to open up their first hospital facility to capture the entire kind of continuum of care. Most of those groups, and Ben talked a lot about it a moment ago, a lot of these value-based groups are really primary care oriented. They're trying to replicate some of the successes that an organization in South Florida, ChenMed, has developed with Medicare Advantage, and applying that to family medicine and pediatrics and just overall primary care. And there's a lot of very good examples and protocols or best practices that organizations that are very financially well managed, that I think some of the academics and other larger health systems can learn quite a bit from. And another thing I want to harp on that Ben mentioned is the integration, and that example with Bright Health about their share price. These, whether it's a physician practice management group or one of these value-based care organizations, probably a drawback that private equity brings is there has been, up until recently, a hyper-focus on growth, acquiring practices at a very fast pace. A potential mistake or a gap in their investment thesis was they never took into account what it takes to really truly integrate a practice, to get costs out, to standardize and modernize systems in order to manage risk and ensure the continuity of care. So these groups that have grown and grown and grown, for every practice they acquire, sometimes they keep their technology, their EHR and their practice management system. Sometimes they keep their billing staff and their billing operation. And a group in South Florida we recently worked with, they had 14 EHR and practice management platforms. They paid 14 vendors for maintenance. They had IT staff that supported 14 systems. They actually had 14 different billing staffs, one staff that managed out of each billing system. And the opportunity of centralizing that, standardizing that, from a people, from a process, from a technology was really imperative to operate as a true group practice model in order to meet some of their financial goals of that organization. And the last thing I wanted to just harp on is these value-based healthcare groups, particularly the primary care organizations, create pretty unique opportunities for hospitals or community health systems, because they're really about managing risk, which means that ensure the quality of those patients, and that extends beyond just primary care. So clinical alignment or clinical partnerships with health systems is very important to them, because they want to manage referral patterns for specialty services and hospital-based care. So the partnerships or health systems are going to grow not just through acquisition and employment of physician, but through unique partnerships and clinical integration programs where patients can truly have better access to the care they need when they need it, to manage the quality in a very coordinated environment. And health systems can do this through partnerships a lot less less capital intensive way, as opposed to just acquiring and subsidizing primary care, which health systems have done in the past. So there's certainly different opportunities for health systems to work with these private entity sponsored or investor sponsored medical groups. That's becoming much more of an opportunity for health systems to work with these new organizations. So thanks again for having me.
Brad, 1 second, we're reading and hearing, given interest rates and where we are in the economy, that things have slowed. They're saying perhaps for the first 6 months, and they're expecting private equity activity to pick up towards the last half of the year. What's your gut on things like that? Are we seeing a slowing? Is it still there's still a lot of cash on the sidelines, but it's gotten more expensive now. So
there's a lot of what they call dry powder, which is cash on the sidelines, and we expect private equity deals to continue, albeit not as fast as they were in the past. There's going to be a greater focus on primary care. You capture primary care, you can really manage in a risk-based environment and the concepts of kind of downstream revenue. But due diligence is playing a much greater role. Understanding the financial health of the practice is one thing from a quality of earnings, but looking at their operations and where are there opportunities to extract costs. They're looking to leverage scale, centralizing revenue cycle, putting in an access call center. So instead of staff at all these practices scheduling appointments, you can do it off-site in a less costly manner. Using technology for patients to schedule in a self-service model. They can schedule any time of the day or night. They don't need to do it between 9 and 5. Nurse triage or telehealth programs. They do really want the ability to integrate those practices. And if you're on the sell side of this, if you're looking for valuations, cleaning up your house, getting on a more modern EHR platform, being able to demonstrate quality. Those are things that are driving valuation. Investors have money, but if you don't have your house in order, so to speak, it will impact your valuation quite a bit. So I think there, Angela, to answer your question, there is money out there. The deals will continue, but there's a heightened scrutiny on diligence efforts and valuation. And if private equity sponsored entities aren't equipped to do all that integration or transformation work, whatever buzzword you want to use, they're not going to realize the value of their investment in a time frame that they're expecting.
Thanks, Brad. On that note, before we turn it over to Lori, on the note of due diligence, looks like 2021 was the height of these investments. Almost 900 deals were done, private equity relative to healthcare practices. 2021. 2022, they say, was the second highest, about 850 deals. And part of that was a big rush to close. So we've been reading and following and seeing in the trades, and with some we work with, there was sort of a lack of due diligence. There's so much competition from these private equity players that need to deploy their investors' dollars over a certain period of time. They're closing, and they haven't really performed the requisite due diligence, quality of earnings reviews, normalizing stuff, and then predicting what's going to happen in the future. And by the way, predicting, revenues off of prior revenues is not necessarily the way to go because reimbursement has gone a bit south. So there was a lack of really intensive due diligence, we're hearing. So that may manifest itself with some of the issues that Brad has just talked about. And now that there's a bit of a lull, given what's been going on, first few months and maybe through half this year, maybe some of these firms, when they start to look at things, there seems to be a slowing. Maybe they'll get a little more deliberate, and they'll take their time from a legal perspective, legal due diligence, as well as financial due diligence, and operational due diligence, of course, and clinical. So, our next panelist, Lori Levine, who is known apparently by many people here, Administrative Director of Corporate Finance here at Nicholas. So without further ado, Lori has we spent some time working on this presentation, who's going to speak to what, and Lori, representing Nicholas has a very unique or different perspective on what you've just heard relative to private equity and what's going on. So Lori, please.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. I'm Lori Levine, I'm the Administrative Director of Corporate Finance. So the corporate finance function, audit, tax, etc. reports to me. I have a traditional CPA background, started at Deloitte in audit for 7 or 8 years, then went into as the CFO of a local HMO for 10 years, and then I spent 20 years in higher ed as a CFO. And then joined here in 2020, and I'm thrilled to be here. So we do have a different approach, as do most hospitals. Private equity is certainly something we deal with every day, right? Our physicians get acquired, the way we interact with them or who we interact with differs, but our approach is different. You heard Matt talk so passionately. I think he said the word community 3 times. That's important to us. That's who we are. So we employ physicians. That's how we're going to grow. We're going to employ physicians. We're going to employ them, like Matt indicated, in our primary and secondary marketplaces. And we will do group acquiring, or I guess as Carlos likes to say it, integrations, but we don't purchase groups. We assume their leases, we employ their physicians, we do all of their administrative work for us, but we don't actually pay money to acquire any physician practices. So what do we look for? We look for physicians who match our mission. They need to be community-based, they need to be excellent at what they do, they need to care for children, they need to be strong clinical providers. They need to really focus on quality. So that's important to us. What do the physicians get out of this, right? Why us instead of PE? Come on, guys, look at us, right? I mean, how great would it be to work for someone like Matt? When you work for PE, having never worked there, but you can talk about it a little bit, but when you work for PE, it's very bottom line oriented. Quality is probably way down on the list, unless it's quality that's going to impact on a bottom line, right? Here, we're not telling you how many patients you should see a day because we understand that some patients are going to take longer and some are going to be shorter. We want you to do what's right for our patients without a focus on how quickly you're turning them, what your billing looks like. So that's very, very important to us. So you talked, both of you, Brad and Ben talked about integration, and all of those things are super important. Carlos told me it took, 12 months at least till we integrate the physicians, our new physicians, so that they are seeped in the mission and the culture of who we are. And we really not struggle, we really strive to make sure that works well, so that those physicians know the clinical subspecialties that we offer. They understand how to access care for their patients in the most appropriate way without worrying frankly, about cost. So how have we done? Last year we added anesthesia, about 30 medical professionals. We added neurology, I think we said about 15, Carlos. We're in the process of adding a primary care effective April 1. Five different offices, 3 in Broward, 2 in Dade. So one of them in my backyard, so that's always nice. And Matt talked about the importance of expanding our footprint in Dade County, where I think we have about 68% market share. But coming out of Dade County, it drops to single digits. So how are we going to grow our market share? We're going to get world-class physicians who are going to treat children in their offices, but refer out complicated cases. So the other thing we've done a really good job with from a physician perspective is partnering with other institutions. We have a great Baptist relationship. I think the year we started with Baptist, I think our Dade County market share grew 3 or 4%. That we think is because of that relationship. We have a partnership with Jupiter. We have a partnership with Naples. So we're looking at ways in which we can bring what we do really well to other institutions. We can have our doctors work there. So I think our physician network has grown. I think we said 35% in the last 4 years, about 100 new physicians. And they're all proud employees of the hospital. So that's.
Lori, great. Talk a little about. Oh, sorry, Ben.
I just have a point to actually add to what Lori said. It might sound strange to you guys that they don't pay for a physician practice group, right? Like they pick up a physician practice and they don't pay. Majority of the people I represent, they pay millions. Right? So why do physicians make that choice? In the area of private equity and being bought out by another business, guess what? It's check the box medicine. And a lot of physicians don't want to do that because they think that they're minimizing themselves, their
Quality for their patients.
Yeah, the quality for their patients is down. They literally don't want to be pawns in that sort of a scheme. However, then there's other physicians that are saying, I'll cash out, I'm good to go.
Thank you.
But yeah.
Yep.
Lori, speak a little bit about recruiting and how you go about it. This is a world-class name here at Nicholas. Do they come to you? Are they coming from all over the country? Are they coming from out of the country?
So, yes.
Medical schools?
Yes to all of the above. We have Carlos, I think, and Matt both told you we're well-recognized, one of the top 100 employers in the country, I think. The number one in South Florida. South Florida itself is a draw, right? No state income tax. But the quality of our brand, that's why it's important to have a great brand, because we need to recruit world-class physicians to South Florida because, frankly, that's what our kids and our communities deserve, right? So, yes to all of the above. Referrals, our people who hear of people. I think we have some of our benefits, TM&E folks in the back, ensuring we have wonderful benefits for physicians, that, we have the president of the hospital who knows everybody's name. All of those intangibles are how you recruit people. And if you're going to come here for money, we're probably not the right place.
Right. But quality of life makes a big difference to a lot of these people that are really into having integrity, having the academics of it, and the true pursuit of, patient care.
Yes, exactly right.
And they're altruistic. There's many physicians that are altruistic.
And particularly in the pediatric world, right? You see that a lot.
Yeah.
Pediatricians and pediatric subspecialists are a very unique breed of people.
True.
One quick comment before we get to Jim, and then we're going to start to open it up. I'd love to answer some questions and create a dialogue, but you could see not only here at Nicholas, but many hospitals are employing, it's what they're doing. It's the natural, push and pull against private equity. Private equity, if you think about it, are out there trying to pick off some of these physicians and assemble them into bigger practices for all those leverage issues. And what does that mean? Given hospital may or may not lose or perhaps get impinged, their referral patterns, obviously, because the hospital can't control them, quote unquote. So you got this back and forth. What we're attempting to do now in this presentation is to, sort of throw a spotlight on what's going on in the private equity world, how active they are, the money that's involved, and what they're throwing around. And it's a dichotomy relative to the hospital world, the not-for-profit hospital world, and how they go about protecting their market share, relative to an employment model. And there's lots of pluses and lots of minuses. Personally, I think, there may be more pluses on the employment side. We don't know. It just depends on the market. So, Jim Petkus, our last panelist, but certainly not the least. I'll let him introduce himself, but he's had a great career at HCA and other places. Remember, no boos or hisses about HCA, no boos or hisses, but he has a lot to say about this world as well. So, Jim, please.
I'll introduce myself. I'm a CPA by trade.
By trade.
I was with Ernst & Young for 12 years and then went in specializing in healthcare finance and then went into the hospital business. And I was a CFO for many divisions of HCA. I was responsible for the 6 hospitals in Nevada and Arizona, then 20 hospitals in Alaska, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. Then the 13 hospitals in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie counties. And then I wound up my career with HCA, being responsible for the network in London and the United Kingdom. So I'm a serial failure at retirement. I retired from HCA. I'm now helping out Broward Health with their joint venture strategy. So I'm the chief executive officer of a company that has a single employee. and
It's not even him. No.
It is. But and so we're working on a Broward Health joint venture strategy. So that's what I'm doing now. In regards to, so I come from the investor-owned side, mostly in my career. With all due respect to Lori, quality is never way down the list, because if it's way down the list, you're out of business. That's just a fact. I would like to see a show of hands from all the people that think doctors will admit patients to facilities that they think are bad. They don't. And it doesn't, over the course of my career, my experience has been that doctors there are exceptions to every rule, but are virtually uniformly doing what they do for all the right reasons. Which means they're not going to admit a patient to a facility they think is bad. They're not going to become employed by a facility that they think is bad. So if quality isn't absolutely at the top of mind, you're out of business. Now, private equity, where does private equity come down in all this? I'll look from the dollars and cents perspective. What does private equity in business do? Private equity is in business to find businesses that they can improve, get in, and get out. And they do it most often with lots of leverage, and because leverage maximizes returns. It's like buying a house for $100,000 and getting a $90,000 mortgage, and putting down $10,000. If that house goes up in value 10%, you've got a 100% return on your 10% investment. That's private equity model right there. Now, it's a risky model because if the house goes down in value 10%, you've lost 100% of your equity investment. So what is private equity doing? They're looking at a business and they're saying, we need to see a plan where we can improve this business. We have to know what we're doing when we get in. From the standpoint, just stepping back for a second, I went through HBO leverage buyout. ACA leverage buyout in 2006 was the largest leverage buyout in the history of the world at that time. It's still in the top 10. Why was it done? Because interest rates were at multi-decade lows. The stock market had priced the company at about 6 times EBITDA, and we realized we couldn't buy a substandard hospital for less than 10 times EBITDA, and we had blue chip facilities, and we were priced at 6 times. So management looked at the company and said the best way for us to deploy capital is to buy ourselves, and we did that. We worked with KKR, Bain, Merrill Lynch Private Equity. It was private for 4 years, re-emerged as a public company in 2010, very, very successful. But you don't see much private equity in the hospital space. You've got Apollo that owns LifePoint and Scion, but you don't see a ton of private equity in the hospital space. Why do you think that is? My own view is because it's very tough to grow revenues in hospitals. We all know your revenues are locked down by insurance companies or the government. It is a hugely capital-intensive business. If you are not constantly investing in your facilities, then your facilities are becoming substandard and non-competitive very fast. And as soon as your facilities become substandard and non-competitive, those physicians that I was referring to before stop referring. So with a business that's very difficult to increase revenues and it's hugely capital intensive, that's not really a place where you're going to see a lot of private equity jumping in. So you don't see private equity in the hospital space that much. Why is private equity getting into the physician space? Doesn't surprise me at all. Because consolidation. The physicians, every independent physician out there is a small business person. And he or she is running a small business. And every single one of those businesses is duplicating back office services and duplicating all kinds of non-revenue producing but very necessary things. You consolidate that, bring economies of scale, you can improve very significantly, rapidly. Well, that private equity has seen this should surprise nobody. And what they're doing is they're looking at these small practices, and they're bringing standardized EHR, standardized billing and collecting, which allows these small businesses to combine into larger businesses and reduce back office and overhead costs substantially, which improves the bottom line, which they then can sell and get out and perform their function. Is that bad? Is that evil? No. What have they done if they take a bunch of small practices, consolidate them, make them more efficient, cut out costs? They created value. So it's hospitals and hospital systems like HCA or I almost said Miami Children's or Nicholas, because I've been around this market for so long. You can see all this gray hair. I remember when it was Variety. Hospitals and private equity are looking at physician practices for totally different reasons. Hospitals are looking at it as a market share play, and that is which they have to, because that's been a 30-year evolution. That's been coming ever since HMOs were created and managed care was created. You have to have contracting. You have to have contracting heft, and having large networks of employed doctors with large market share gives you the kind of contracting heft that's going to allow you to sit across the table from these gigantic insurance companies in a position of some sort of equality. What is private equity looking at in physician practices? Just what I said. They're looking at consolidating, growing earnings, selling off. So are you in competition for doctors' practices with private equity? Yes and no. No, from the standpoint that you're that they're in it for an entirely different reason than you're in it. But if they get one of the if they get a practice that actually it wouldn't be terrible if they picked up a practice that admits a lot to Miami. I keep saying Miami Children's, that admits a lot to Nicholas, because they don't care where the doctor admits. If Joe DiMaggio buys that practice, that's worse for you than if private equity does. So at the same time, though, it prevents you from picking up a practice that you can use to improve your market share. So private equity is not, from where I sit, is not a gigantic threat to Nicholas, but they are going to be out there competing. That's my view of private equity.
Thank you, Jim. I would like to turn it back to Brad over my right shoulder. He has some commentary on the regulatory issues relative to PE, and then I will ask our lawyer friend here, Ben, to weigh in after Brad. All right?
One just quick comment just to follow up on something that Jim said that's interesting. Besides capital, private equity, some of their businesses, they're really funding innovation. They're trying to break a model that's not financially viable over the long term. So some of the new models of care, it's not a bad thing. They're not all going to win, but I think it is going to change and bring some financial discipline and financial rigor into a business that always hasn't operated as efficiently as a true for-profit organization. Physicians didn't go to business school. That's never been their mission, their focus. But running an independent practice, they're forced to do a lot of things and wear a lot of hats. But I do hope, and I think there's a lot of activity in South Florida when it comes to just innovative models that are being funded by, whether it's Florida Blue, whether it's private equity, whether it's even some privately or publicly held firms. I do, or at least I have hope that there will be some innovations in care delivery models that will benefit all of us and our children's and their children. The regulatory market of healthcare it's real. It's probably more heavily regulated than any other industry, and it's not something that all private equity investors they understand the regulations of the day. But when you have something like No Surprises Act comes out, and you have businesses that are private equity based that have made their fortune on out-of-network and negotiating out-of-network rates, you get surprised sometimes that some of these investors can't see things like that coming. Certain businesses I'm not going to name that made a fortune of having their anesthesiologists all out of network and pathologists, and patients would never ever know that when they have an urgent care that possibly could get a bill for that. So there have been some organizations and investors that haven't really understood the regulatory nature of healthcare, and it's a dynamically evolving air market that the people that are in it for just pure get in, get out in several years, turn it around, maximize EBITDA. There is more to it than the regulatory world. You have Stark, you have False Claims, No Surprises Act, ICD-10. There's just a wave of regulations. It seems like every year or two, CARES Act. There's just a wave of things that other businesses that investors would invest in aren't always have to deal with some of the realities that everyone in that room has to deal with on a daily basis.
Counselor, thank you, Brad, very much. Counselor, what say you?
All right. Okay. In the private equity space, you often see a lot of cowboys, right? So as my colleagues were saying, there's a lot of powder on the sidelines. So people are desperate to literally spend it because they got to get the money invested. The investors are looking for, a quick investment and then a quick return. So when that happens, there's a short time frame and you've got to pull the trigger on your deal occurring. And when that happens, there's also due diligence that overlooked. And when and I can't emphasize to you the importance of due diligence enough. When it comes to actually due diligence, you look at one entity buying another entity, right? So if there is a single person in this 5,000 person group that's Medicare excluded, even though they're getting bought up by a 20,000 person group, the whole group is now infected, okay? So that's how serious Medicare exclusions are. So, and I've seen people waive it. I've seen people do it on reps and warranties. For those of you who are not familiar with what reps and warranties are, what they're saying is, since you're the president of that organization, promise to me that you have no Medicare excluded individuals. Can you imagine that? And remember, once you merge and once you do this, it's like scrambling eggs. How do you unscramble them? So it's a big problem. There's a lot of money in the push that's pushing all of these things. And people, I think in the past, haven't looked at it closely enough. But I think going forward, you're going to get a lot better magnifying glasses going through this equity, the M&A space, because they really want to know what's underneath the hood. And they want to understand it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ben. Lori or Carlos, as you bring physicians in more and more, a very tight footprint here, physically and real estate, do you have them all in one office building somewhere? Are they all back and forth? Are they still spread out?
Yes to all of the above. So we're in the process of doing a strategic facilities master plan, and that will take us 20 years, 10 years, I don't know, a long time, way long time. And I think, the concept is going to become more of a hub concept, and it's going to be hubs throughout our Tri-County area. So we're not there yet. It's funding, it's planning, but I think that's the long-term goal. The short-term goal, they're everywhere. They're in their offices, the ones who are, assuming leases. We have how many, Carlos? How many locations? 15, 20 different locations?
Including our urgent care centers, we're at about 30 locations.
So 30 locations in Tri-County?
Tri-County area.
Yeah.
And what we try to do is to your question, we look strategically where we can place them. It was not perfect, right? It doesn't work all the time. So we bring them in and we try to place them exactly where we want them. Sometimes it doesn't work the way you think it's going to work. You have to navigate that and eventually find a place.
And remember, they come with their own patient base, right? You don't want to take a guy from North Palm Beach County and move him to Dade County because his patients wouldn't necessarily follow. So I think Carlos and his team does a good job juggling and our construction people finding spots.
Thank you. Now the fun begins, and we want to open it up to a dialogue, questions, comments. Don't be shy. We covered a fair amount in a short period of time, and we definitely have a mixture of experience here. Some very experienced and some, but this is an educational program. It's a great organization, so don't be shy. Thoughts or questions? I have a hand. Yes, sir.
I won't be shy, but thank you very much. That was really informative. We just actually got acquired. I'm in a rehabilitation space, and we got acquired just within the last 6 months by PE. And I guess the question I have is looking ahead. We had close to 2,000 acquisitions that occurred over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years. How many of those have sold, or how many of those private equity companies have recouped their dollars and moved on, and where they sell to? And do you think this is a sustainable model, for private equity to continue to invest in the healthcare space, the next 4 or 5, 6 years? Because at a certain point, I would think there'll be a saturation level where they're all going to want to get out. And if they're all getting in at the same time, they're all going to try to get out at the same time.
That's a loaded question right there. Who wants? I can take a piece of it. Brad, who wants to?
part of that is, have they turned it yet? Is that what I heard? Have they, turned? Yeah. From our perspective, given my practice and what I work with and what I've seen, they're staying in longer than anticipated. Sometimes I get a little nervous with them because the day after they close, they're planning their exit. In the non-healthcare world, that's how it works. Jim mentioned leverage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Easier to achieve in certain businesses. Healthcare is a much different model, physicians, of course. So it's now becoming a little bit elongated. So their 3-year thing is becoming 5-year thing, is becoming 7-year thing, and they're getting itchy, and they're putting in more money. So so we haven't seen, someone coming in at 7 EBITDA or 10, and then you ask yourself, they've made now a big investment. They need to consolidate. Have you been hearing? We need more capital to put in infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Now who are they going to sell it to? I mean, they just paid a fortune 7 times, 10 times, whatever the number. Dermatology is 12 times. And now my question is always, I have all of my colleagues, who are they going to sell it to? For their return. If they could squeeze some in expenses, that's one thing. To get a multiple on what they've just paid is a very difficult thing. So, it's a big fat unknown, sir. But I can tell you, their plans about a 3-year exit is now starting to get elongated. So you're in for the ride. Who wants to comment? Jim, Lori, Brad? It's a very poignant question.
Sure.
Sounds like you just did a deal?
We did a deal about 6 months ago.
About 6 months ago. Brad?
I mean, I guess I don't know that much about how many are getting out or this, that, and the other. I'm not that versed in essentially what's going on in the private equity space with Knox. But Angelo says they're ended up staying in longer than they had hoped. I guess I'm not surprised because they're probably getting in with a plan on taking, consolidation and taking out costs and making these things more efficient. And they're probably running into what everybody in this room is running into, and that is massive insurance companies cutting their revenues. And then
Inflation.
Well, there's inflation, but the inflation isn't necessarily making its way through your reimbursements. That's for sure. And so as fast as they can pull costs out, due to your point about inflation, costs are rising, and then they're running into the problem of fixed revenues. I guess I'm speculating, but if they're staying in, if they're finding that they're having to stay in longer than they thought, I suspect that's why.
And who's buying? That's the big question.
You got me.
So from what I can tell, and the way the discussions are going among the strategists, is that they're hoping, this hasn't quite been pulled off the right way, is that the insurance companies are going to buy them, like a United Healthcare or a Blue Cross or a Cigna, and then bring them into their network. So you keep insurance. You already have this captured patient base in that insurance company, and then what you do is you pull in these practice groups to literally, have them be the service providers. So they're hoping that the insurance companies will come in and pick them up for the most part, or Wall Street.
I think, Brad, you have a couple of comments, please?
We're actually working on 2 exits right now that are really because there are these 2 groups, different specialties, are just burning through so much cash that it's completely caught the private equity sponsors off guard. In both cases, there's some similarities to what we're seeing this last week out west. There's leadership that are more investment banker background without having strong practice management experience. They're growing because money was cheap, and they're acquiring. People are going to flip it to a strategic sale or to another private equity investor. And they never took the time to develop an integrated practice model. Centralized functions like revenue cycles, standardized technology, standardized kind of best practice workflows. They just bought, and never did any integration. So their costs are completely out of control. One group that we're working on, we are going to consolidate billing operations and put them on a more modern billing system capable of supporting their growth. We do any industry benchmark, they've got over 150 more people in their billing office than their volume realizes. Labor cost is very expensive now. In a small margin business, healthcare that's not sustainable. However, when we got first called to help them figure out what's going on, there was still a lot of pushback. We can use 14 billing systems. We can have all these bolt-on tools. We can outsource some of our revenue cycle offshore. It's cheaper labor there. There was a fundamental lack of consideration of a real, what an efficient physician practice operating model needs to look like. Really smart people. They didn't have a lot of the healthcare expertise on it. A lot of them are flipping to other private equity companies. There used to be in the technology world, we would see that PE companies, all these funds have a horizon. So they're in it after a certain period of time, they need to get their money out. They need to return it to the investors, the pension funds or whatever is funding them. So they need to exit. We're seeing payers get in the mix and buying medical groups or investing in group practices. Look what Optum's doing. They're a big company. I wouldn't say that they can operate like in some regards, they throw a lot of cash around like a private equity company can do. They're doing some innovative things, but they're getting involved in it. But not all these are successful. And what we see is same attributes that make one of these groups very successful and economically viable. You flip that upside, and that's the exact same reason why they're failing, the lack of what's needed to be done. And part of it's leadership.
Thank you, Brad. Lori's shaking her head. Lori, I've been meaning to ask, with these issues of bringing folk on and consolidating and making it efficient to them billing, how do you handle it? You bring a lot of folks on as an employee, you may take over the leasehold, etc. But then how long does it take, and how hard is it to now integrate them, to get them onto your billing system, medical record system, etc., etc.?
That part's the easy part.
Really?
I think that happens relatively quickly, but to understand the referral patterns, to know who to go to feel like you belong to part of our community, I think is the harder part. And I think Carlos would say, he calls it an integration and it'll take a year. I think the sort of administration, you're going to be on payroll day one, you're going to have our benefits day one. But the rest of all of those things, I think are more of a challenge. It's a lifetime of how they used to do business that now needs to change. So, Carlos, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he says about 12 months.
And you explain that, you manage their expectations, right? When you're speaking. How long does it take, from identifying a solo practitioner or a small practice or even a mid-sized practice, from the date of saying hello to becoming an employee day one? Is it a 6-month process? Is it a year process?
About 6 to 8 months between due diligence and go live.
Yeah. I heard due diligence. That's a good thing. You've heard me say there's been a lack of due diligence in 2022, but I think we'll get back to that. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I wanted to share 2 scenarios and see if you've heard about either one, and if you have, what are your thoughts? One would be the private equity Prospect Medical purchase of the poor hospitals in the poor community outside of South Philly to take $457 million and walk away from them last year. And then the large for-profit health system that bought the hospitals in Louisville to walk away from them, giving them back to the state. So the carnage in both of those situations.
There's also Hahnemann in Philadelphia. The largest safety net hospital in Philadelphia was bought by a company in California, American academic healthcare system, American Academic. They also own George Washington, or they own Howard University Medical Center in DC. I'm very familiar with Crozier, but if you look what happened at Hahnemann, they bought a medical center, a safety net hospital that serves the underserved in a very big area, big academic program as well. Their entire reason they got in was to run the place into the ground so that they could take over the real estate. So I really don't, I think that is such an anomaly that those things are I don't think that's really the norm. I think that's a very extreme example, but it's really not a company, a business that they raise money. They don't manage businesses that well. Crozier, a lot of debt, too much debt. The prospect, that's the problem in Philadelphia is it's a very poor payer mix, too much debt. And they're just financially not viable, and they're doing everything they can just to figure out what clinical programs can they provide. Can they close one facility, shift it to behavioral health, so they're really looking at service lines and service line strategy where they can make money. But that would not be an example of what happened with Hahnemann at all. Well-intended operators that thought they could really run safety net institutions, which have no margin really, and run them well. They weren't successful in operating.
So you just pinpointed, the friction between the two approaches. Lori mentioned the mission. Most of these, Nicholas and many others, are very mission-oriented. That's the not-for-profit model. And then you see real estate plays. They are aberrations, but it does give the for-profit side of things a bad name, So, but that's exactly the friction, and those are the choices. It's also studies are now coming out. When private equity takes over physician practices, amazingly, volume jumps. Wow. Insurance companies that have a lot of technology, they're figuring out all of a sudden there's 20% or more in charges. All of a sudden, patients are seeing the given physician 30 minutes or longer before they were in and out. So there's data now coming out that's being tracked that, argues against private equity, because we have healthcare and then we have the business of healthcare. And it's been an age-old friction. And then when you hear stories like you just brought out to buy inner city real estate, those are aberrations, true, but they're hurtful. And, I think really the main purpose of this whole discussion this evening was to point out, the action that's out there, the capital that's out there, the good and the bad, what's turning over, what hasn't been successful. And to the Nicholas folk in the room here, given your brand, your particular hyper expertise, taking care of children, to me, you're going to be around another 200 years, especially with some of the leadership I've met in the room this evening. So I applaud you all. Carlos, what do you say? Any other questions before I bring Carlos back up to wrap up? We have a hand in the back. Yes, sir.
I came from Jackson. I was their medical director.
One second.
Yeah. Oh. I came from Jackson. I'm Christoph Saar. I was their medical director of ambulatory care. I come from more than half my career as a medical director for federally qualified health centers. And both are, in a sense, a safety net mechanism. One is community-owned, one is government-owned. The boards are going to be different. Their missions are going to be different. One is duty-bound by law to take care of certain people. The other is by charter, if you will. And what I'm hearing today a lot of is how there may be a battle, if you will, between the mission of medicine or healthcare and the profit. And there's the no money, no mission as well. And so having seen this, I just wonder whether the ACHE as an organization could write a guideline for how an organization that has a nonprofit aim for the public good, if you will, to evaluate potential propositions from partners with money that is to be had, so that they are written at the end of the day in ways that they cannot be manipulated out of servicing their innate goals while trying to survive financially, so that you don't see what happens with this profit organization trying to grab the real estate, or these big players coming and buying things up and then leaving them in the cold. Could the ACHE write something or provide a service to organizations that are, let's say, wandering through this morass, not really knowing much about business and what might happen out there, so as to provide support to healthcare entities with the knowledge that people who understand medicine as well as the profit and the business are informed in that way. Just a thought.
Well put, thank you. Anybody want to make a comment? Jenna?
Come on. This gentleman had a question.
Oh, just a question.
Here. Microphone.
Hi everyone, I'm in administration at a small clinic. So, everything that you guys have been talking about has been very relevant and very eye-opening. This question is kind of aimed at everyone on the panel because everyone has kind of alluded to it. So, as a small clinic, Ben, I heard you speak about, not as much focus on EBITDA due to the changes in revenue models that's kind of going on. But however, Jim, I heard you talk a lot about it, and Angelo as well, that, it's like 12 times, 8 times, 3 times, depending on the practice type of dermatology, for example. And so, finally, Lori, in terms of Nicholas, when you do an acquisition, it's actually not based on any of this, right? It's just based on the acquisition is almost like a partnership. So now there's different models when a small practice might want to partner with either private equity or a hospital or an insurance company or whoever the payer is, right? What are the different paths available? And as a clinic, what should you look for?
I think part of that question is, what do you want? What does the clinic owners want out of it? Do they want the payday? Do they want a long-term partnership that encourages their long-term viability? So I think part of it is determining what clinic owners or anybody wants out of this. If the issue is they want a payday, they want to retire, probably my path isn't the right path. It's one of these guys.
To her point, what is the clinic looking to do? I can see if the clinic wants to stay somewhat independent, but is looking for help with things like standardized billing, standardized EHR, and I can see, and the doctors in the clinic are saying, I can see the same. Look. Getting paid more is not a terrible thing. I can see the same patients, I can do the same thing, but if this private equity group can bring efficiencies to my practice that I cannot achieve on my own, then working for them might be good. If, like Lori says, they're saying, I'm sick of this, I'm sick of the billing, I'm sick of the clinic, I'm sick of the insurance companies, but I still want to practice medicine, I still want to see patients, then going to work for a hospital system is so. I second what she said. It depends entirely on what the clinic owners are looking for.
Okay, absolutely. And a quick follow-up question: in staying independent, how does that help the overall community?
That's a hard one. If they staying independent is one thing about, you're talking about doctors that stay independent. You can hold your hospitals accountable if you stay independent. You can look at the hospital that you have privileges at, and you can say, I don't like your capital spend. I don't think you're investing enough. I'm taking my business elsewhere. You can't do that if you're not independent.
And I can actually
answer that in the opposite. You know, if you're not financially secure, and that you would actually hurt the neighborhood.
Right.
So that's
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that. What I'm seeing is that there's a lot of independent physicians that are sinking in the sense that they feel like they're drowning, they're putting in their own money into this, and they don't want to go and be a part of a bigger group per se, like they don't want to join a hospital, they don't want to join a big corporation. And the one thing that I think that they're overlooking is their peers. I don't think that they're talking to their peers enough to see how the peers are doing, because no matter how you look at it, there's definitely different TIN numbers. All the TIN numbers are related to a payer contract. So kind of like take a look at like, hey, what's the lay of the land? You know, what's my peer getting? Does my peer have a fantastic contract with Humana and I don't? What do I need to do differently? They're just not talking to each other. And the division among the physician, I think, can hurt them.
Thank you, everyone.
So this just about wraps it. Please join me in giving a nice round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all very much. We enjoyed it.
So thank you all again for attending. This was a really fantastic program. I think so, but please fill out your survey with the QR code and please give your honest feedback. I want to thank again the panelists, our moderator. In honor of your time, we are making a donation on your behalf to the Healthcare Leadership Fund of ACHG, so thank you all. And our next events, we have our student case competition on April 15th at Broward College. So if anyone is available, please come and support our students. They work really hard. And our next education event is going to be at Boca Raton Regional Hospital on April 20th. Please join us there. Again, same time in the evening, 5:30. So if we can ask the panel to stay for 1 minute so we can get a picture, and any board members here, please join us in a picture up front. Thank you. Thank you.